Hello, we are on with my friend Melanie Renfrew-Hebert, also my local state representative. Uh,
Not yet.
Not yet.
Hopefully in November.
Hopefully in November. I actually thought you were currently serving, so that's
I am not.
okay. Well, I hope you will be soon.
Me too.
So I wanted to talk to you because I know that you served numerous roles in our state that are political roles in state government, in local government, and in organizations in New Hampshire. And I wanted to talk to you about all the different roles you've served and your life experience in those roles.
Oh, fantastic. Where would you like me to start?
Well, I know that you've worked for the state as a labor market analyst, you said.
Absolutely.
What was your time there like?
It was wonderful. The office itself, the work itself was amazing. The people that I worked with, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. But it was an office full of people who really, really were committed to what they were doing, which made me happy. But I came in there and started mostly with data manipulation for a specific program, for the Workforce Investment Act
Okay.
program that we were working with. They would collect the data, we would analyze the data, and return it back to them for reporting. And it was a very complicated procedure that previously had been done by hand. Basically, one step at a time, and I was glad to come in and automate it for them and make what was a 30-day process 2 days to get everything done and a couple of days to go through it and make sure it was all set.
Oh wow, that was a big improvement.
That is the kind of change that I like to make. Um, Make sure it's accurate, make sure it meets the need of what they wanted, and also make sure that it was timely. Because with a long, stretched out time frame, you can lose data. You can lose momentum, is a better word for it.
Absolutely.
But that wasn't the only thing I did for them. I also worked with all of the schools that were looking to have their programs approved for WIA funds. And in order to do that, they had to get through the process of identifying how each program would serve the communities that were important to the Workforce Investment Act. And so we put all of that information into a database that they could access as well, upload materials and get their approvals done.
So tell me about the Workforce Investment Act. What was that act's goals?
We still have portions of that, I believe, still in New Hampshire.
Okay.
And the goals were to make sure that we were providing educational, not we as in the state, we're providing educational activities that would help lead to better outcomes in employment.
Okay. And when you were working as a labor market analyst, just for clarity, was that in the bureaucracy? Was that as a member of government, or was that more like a consultation of some kind? Is that a
No, I
private
was
organization?
not as a consult. I actually was employed by the New Hampshire Employment Securities Economic and Labor Market Information Bureau.
Okay.
And the last part that really was that I was really associated with was every year they put out a guide, a labor market guide, and so those are actually produced by the individuals who work in the different fields within that office. So I was able to help with that as well.
Okay. So that's like getting information out to ordinary people in the workforce about job opportunities, or
No, getting information out on the status of different things in the state as it regards to labor market.
okay.
And they actually produce a book that goes out once a year for that.
So what were some of the other roles that you played in the state government as well?
Um, well, the other one is quasi-state government
Okay.
because it's New Hampshire Housing,
Mhm.
and I worked for the New Hampshire Housing Authority. I worked there in the assisted housing division, working with individuals who were receiving benefits through the assisted housing division, but needed more of a hand up in order to be able to maybe get employment. or other goals that they had to increase their standard of living.
Okay.
I mean, really, the goal is to get off of housing. It's not a lifestyle.
Right.
So anything that we could provide them access to, things that other people who are maybe more affluent would take for granted. Now remember, this is about 12, 14 years ago now, and back then we were talking about how do we get access, especially in North Country,
Mhm.
how do we get access to internet?
Right.
So
Yeah.
these individuals could even look for any kind of employment without having to all go down to the Social Security office or go down to Employment Security.
That's great. One of the things I say when trying to describe the divide between maybe the left and the right in politics is I find a lot of times the left's emphasis is on creating opportunities for people, right? The emphasis is on creating opportunities and allowing them to sort of seek out those opportunities themselves. And that's a great example where by providing people in a rural area with internet access, that's an opportunity that helps people to help themselves to get employment.
I agree. That and the divide between whether or not to have safety nets
Mm.
within our social system. And by safety nets, I mean things like welfare,
Right.
things like Social Security.
Mm.
Those are safety nets. Some of it could be unemployment insurance.
Mm-hmm.
It could be food pantries, even basic things. I find part of the divide comes that on the left we feel that those are the responsibility of the government to help subsidize some things to make raise up the level of livability for more people.
Mm-hmm.
And on the right, it's been my experience that they are more um, likely to support supports that are more local.
Okay.
And that, in my experience, that often can't be scaled up enough to help fulfill the need in the community. Though I appreciate that everybody tries in one way or another.
Right, right. Yeah, so let me think here. So to go back to your labor market analyst position, you mentioned unemployment insurance just now, and I was wondering how you felt about during COVID, especially in New Hampshire specifically, people talking about saying unemployment insurance was paying more than some people's wages. People were talking about cutting unemployment insurance for that reason. Having served a role in labor market analysis, how do you feel about the COVID labor market?
It's a tough one. It is. Yes, some people received, because of the additional government stipends for unemployment, they received additional funds that would have been above what they were probably previously earning in employment. But they weren't sustainable, and it was never meant to be a long-term fix. Everyone was keenly aware of the fact that those benefits were going to end at a certain time. Um, I did listen to a lot of rhetoric from individuals saying, well, if you keep giving them that amount of money, they have no incentive to go back to work. And I can't help but think to myself that um, while that money might have been more than what they were living off of before, that money in no way could meet the needs for every individual who is receiving it long term to be able to afford housing, as the cost of housing increased during COVID as well. Housing and food and medical insurance, all of that. So I never thought that anyone considered it a long-term option to not go back to work.
Right.
It was just a matter of when.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. I definitely think a lot of times right-wing critics will kind of imply that it's a plan, it's a plot to bring it in permanently. And during a pandemic, it does make sense to emphasize that it very clearly was temporary. I also wonder, during the pandemic there was a sort of a labor shortage, or on the left there might be disagreement about whether or not there was a labor shortage. How do you feel about that? Do you feel there was a labor shortage?
I honestly hadn't looked at that part of the issue, but from a personal standpoint, I would think that many people were concerned about working in any field that was going to engage in interaction around other people.
Mm.
If it comes to health and safety, we already every day put people's health and safety at risk because of a fear of not making money.
Right.
You just have to go back and look through OSHA reports to figure that one out. But yeah, people voluntarily sometimes put themselves into a situation where their health and safety um, can be determined by whether or not they actually need to support a family.
Mm.
Um, I don't like that, but it happens. So during COVID, when businesses closed down, many of them closed down for the period because, again, they were receiving funding as well to stay closed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it was a little advantageous for them. And unemployment was paying additional funds to people to not go to work.
Right.
So during that period, they could have an area of time where maybe their labor force cost was less than what they might still be bringing in from previous work. I don't know. I didn't look into that part of it very much, but I think it's a safe assumption.
Oh.
Many businesses actually closed down their entire offices, which is a huge savings. And when they came back smaller, more lean, with some tele communication instead of in office
Some people
personnel.
working from home now, yeah.
Yeah. So again, not knowing because I haven't read up on that, but just feeling it from the perspective of someone who, had I not already been home, I would have had to be making those same decisions. I would think that it was a gamble for the businesses a bit, but more of a gamble for the families
Yeah.
who don't have other things to fall back on.
I know that during the pandemic I had a sort of a weird mixed bag of life experiences, because typically I would be advocating for expanded employment.
Mm-hmm.
Lowered unemployment generally puts upward pressure on wages, so I want higher wages, I want more employment. So on one hand I wanted that, but then day to day in my working life I was working at a short staffed place that was trying to find workers, and I was doing extra work because it was short staffed. And then also at the same time, at one point I got sick. It wasn't COVID, thank goodness, but I did get razzed by my coworkers at the place that I worked for calling out sick. And there was even times where I didn't wear a mask because I worked at a very conservative workplace, and if I wore a mask, I'd be harassed all day long.
And may even get less hours.
Yeah. So I had simultaneously a pressure to work, and then also we were short staffed, and then also I want us to be short staffed because it puts upward pressure on wages. So it was a very weird mixed equation for me during the pandemic. It gave me a lot of conflicting things to think about politically.
Yeah. For me, also being a stay-at-home mom, basically, we both know I do some other things outside of the house, but I'm technically a stay-at-home mom. And so I'm thinking of other parents who could not take the time off of work or couldn't afford the time off of work and were forced into a situation where childcare was closing down and their children were at school.
Right.
So how do they overcome that? And how many people actually have enough money in the bank to survive being able to stay out of work? And this is a problem that mainly affected women as well. So it did not great things for the women's workforce, which I'm very passionate about.
Yeah, I mean, in my experience, almost any time something like this happens, it's the mothers that end up getting hit the worst. I found a lot of times single working mothers are bearing the brunt of the social labor and the manual labor of working in the workforce simultaneously.
Even with the protections we have now, women are still more likely to be let go than men, and women are still making, I think the most recent numbers were 76 cents to the dollar.
Right?
Yeah, I think that is. Don't quote me on it though. I haven't looked it up recently.
I haven't looked it up either. The last I heard was during the Clinton campaign. I think it was 73 at the time.
Yeah, we'll put a little asterisk next to that statement.
As asterisks next to any statistic I ever cite.
Oh, well.
So what were some other roles? I know you've also served roles in the local government here in New Hampshire.
I have. If I can make a plug for one more job that I had,
Absolutely.
was for Granite State Independent Living.
Okay.
Because when we ignore a complete section of our workforce based on disability, it hurts the entire workforce. So my dissertation from Southern New Hampshire was actually on workforce cooperatives and the employment of individuals with disabilities. What I wanted to know is what makes workforce cooperatives, what makes them different than regular employment, that people with disabilities can maintain their employment longer through a cooperative.
Okay, yeah.
And one of the interesting findings in my dissertation was that most of the people, even if I already knew that they had a disability, most of the people in a workforce cooperative would not identify as being a person with a disability.
Okay.
Because they had found a niche and a place where they could work to their full ability, and also have some, depending on how small or how big the cooperative is, we're also able to keep their employment. So just for example, if I did woodworking for a living and I couldn't fulfill my orders because of my disability, I might, or if I was hospitalized or something like that, I might not be able to have any work and any income for a long period of time.
Right.
And rebuilding my business would have been really difficult to do were I able to come back to it. Whereas in a workforce cooperative, you have some safety nets again to fall back on that make it easier for you to maintain your employment. Now, the bigger the cooperative, the more it behaves like a business.
Okay.
And the more voices get into the mix about talking about what they will allow and what they won't allow, and that makes it harder for people with disabilities. So, smaller the cooperative, better your chances of maintaining employment as a individual with a disability. The bigger the cooperative, the more it behaves like any other business, and the likelihood of being able to have those safety nets disappears.
Yeah. Well, that's because it starts to lose the humanity, probably, right, of the small institution. Because there's a humanness to smaller institutions like cooperatives that inclines us to our better nature towards taking care of people like that.
Do you think it has maybe more to do with seeing the actual people you work with every day, and having, in a small cooperative, for example, the people that you're working with on a day-to-day basis, you see them all. There's nobody in an upper office somewhere else that.
I think that's
that's
the
part
same.
of the
Yeah,
humanity.
that's part of what I'm saying. Yeah. Well, because when you don't see people every day, and when you are in that distant upper office, you can't see people in a human way, I would say. You only see them through paperwork about how good of a job they've been doing, or metrics about their performance, or reviews from their manager. So that is sort of what I mean when I say humanity. Yeah.
So I really enjoyed working. My dissertation actually came out of my experiences with Granite State Independent Living. That, and about 1/3 of my brain is full of laws through the Social Security on individuals with disabilities and what they can and cannot do for in regards to work.
That's gotta be rough to have a whole third of your brain dedicated to that.
And the answer, by the way, to that question is that individuals with disabilities can do any job that they are physically able to do and that they want to do.
Okay.
The only thing that's different is how Social Security will count their earnings.
Okay. Yeah.
And there's great programs through Social Security who are actually driven to allow people to work as much as they're able to.
Is it a thing where maybe not everyone knows about those programs, not everyone's applying for them?
Not everybody knows about it. Most people are scared. Most people, when they get SSI or SSDI, it's actually two programs.
Mm.
If they get SSI or SSDI, they don't understand um, how their work would affect their payment every month, and that frightens them because again it goes back to their family and taking care of their family or taking care of themselves. So some don't even look for the information. They just say I can't work.
Yeah, that's actually a point I bring up a lot when talking about the benefits of maybe more universal social programs. I read a book called Poorly Understood. It's a very good book about welfare policy in America, or social assistance policy. Um, and one of the things that they argued is a benefit of universal programs. They kind of agree with the conservatives a little bit in saying that, well, yeah, if you give people money because they're poor, that does kind of create a disincentive for seeking out other opportunities. It creates opportunities for them, but it also creates a disincentive for seeking out employment, right? But if you make it universal, then you're helping people at the lower branch of, or at the lower income brackets, I should say, and you're also giving them a good incentive to continue to seek out employment. How do you feel about that, the universal social programs like that?
I love the idea of universal health care.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I like the idea, well, I really like the idea of ensuring that everyone has a certain standard of living
Mm-hmm.
that rises slightly above our poverty level. That would be good, right?
That would be great.
Anything above that becomes a huge stalwart of rhetoric from both sides, right? I think that the Democrats have done well with creating more safety nets through opportunity
Mm-hmm.
than just using a welfare model, if you will,
Okay.
while still recognizing that that model is necessary to provide things like food for children
Right.
and housing for individuals who need it, as if any of us could find housing right now.
Mm.
Um, and I think that they more care about how people will be taken care of now so that they can grow up to those better lives than just more of the you should take care of your own family. What do we call the old Protestant ethic, right?
Yeah,
If you
Protestant
just worked harder, you could have everything you need.
Mm.
Without the understanding that not everybody is capable of working harder or doing more.
Yeah. If there's anything I believe in at this point, it's deconstructing that pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I even think that almost any political theory could be compatible with helping people, um, better than just looking at individuals and saying pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Um, even on the right, let's say you're looking at like a Cato Institute person talking about removing regulations so that there can be more economic growth. Even that is a conversation about society, it's a conversation about politics, and it's a conversation about making things better by changing politics rather than just looking inward at yourself. I also think a lot of people on the right conflate your individual behavior with talking about politics. So they'll tend to believe a lot of the times that if you're going to have a politics that is very helpful to people, that means that you as an individual aren't going to engage in self-help. And I think that's just not true. You can absolutely believe that you shouldn't have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and still as an individual be motivated and try to pull yourself up as much as you can.
I think that's a good point. I would also say though that while the Democrats do a really good job of providing those safety nets that I was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
It is actually, I think, more people on the Republican side who come up with those smaller local based programs which help a lot of people as well. What I can't see is why we can't bridge the divide between that. I think it's because it's got the word government in the middle.
Okay.
I think if we took away the government label of this and put the two sides together, I don't know, over a potluck dinner in a church hall, we could probably get some real things done. Um, but again, there's issues with surrounding anything having to do with the church and education, and the church and other government programs. And we know why. It's built right into our Constitution.
Is that what you would say when you say that the right is better at some of these local assistance programs? Are you referring maybe more to the church and some of these organizations?
Yes. That's what I'm referring to. They have more church-based organizations that do a lot of outreach into their communities. It's really just neighbors helping neighbors. But we can't scale up to the size that we need for a state or a country based on neighbors helping neighbors. It needs a more systemic, attainable, and long-term solution than that.
And I do think we've lost, on the left and right and everybody, we've lost those civil society organizations. I think that's a big thing. Bowling Alone, if you've ever heard of that book, Robert Putnam.
I've heard of Putnam's book, but I don't think I ever read Bowling Alone.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, the analysis starts with bowling clubs. Not bowling, but specifically bowling leagues, right? A lot of people used to be in bowling leagues, and it was a way that people consistently met up in person in their local community. And he also talked about church groups and local choirs and reading groups and all these other local organizations, and he showed consistently across the board there was a decline in membership in these local collective organizations that people used to be a part of more. You know, what's the Lions Club, for example, or the Rotary Club. Those kinds of organizations aren't necessarily super political, but they had people who were organized and motivated, and that became the foundation from which both active members of Democratic and Republican parties could recruit and talk to their community through those organizations.
And now you hit on something in Goffstown that works really well. Our Lions Club is extremely active here in Goffstown, as well as, what are some of the others? You know, it's all of our groups that are kind of community based are very, very active. And they do hold conversations, and they do get things done. That's why we have a food pantry that works overtime at the moment. It's why we even look at for smaller projects like the Kids Weekend School Bag Program for kids that might face food insecurity during the weekend. And yes, we have those in Goffstown as well. The community clothing closet that supplies a lot of clothes to kids in the community, to adults in the community, to recently refugees who've come into the community and needed more things than just clothing.
Is that the one like right in the center of Goffstown? I think I've seen the community clothing closet there.
It's wonderful. It doesn't have a lot of hours at the moment, but it has a lot of heart, and we have a lot of stuff on the shelves in there. So
and is that it's run by these community organizations, but maybe does it receive governmental support?
I am not sure about that.
Okay.
I could eventually put you in touch with the person who oversees the project.
Sure.
Which is then also overseen by, I wonder if it's part of Goffstown Network. In which case I have to look that up. So
asterisks on everything I say. But yeah.
And some of what I say.
One issue that was an area of focus for me when I first started reading about and learning about politics was I tend to prefer decentralization, but I'm also I very strongly prefer broad social programs and a sort of empathetic disposition for government. You know what I mean? And so because of that, one issue that I looked into was maybe we could have more social programs run by these sorts of local organizations that have that local knowledge, that human knowledge of their communities, rather than maybe a distant government bureaucracy, but with some oversight and support from government as well.
I kind of feel that's what we have, at least here in Goffstown.
Oh,
You know, all of our things are run locally, but some things we couldn't do without, I'm sure, without out of state, not out of state, um, out of town funding.
hmm.
Um, so state funding partially pays for our schools, right?
Right, right.
I say partially, and you and I have talked about this. You know where I stand
Mm-hmm.
about stand on school funding, but you didn't ask me to talk about that today. That's another soapbox I'll be glad to break out any other time. Um, I mean, we do have a lot of programs here, and I think that they do receive support from other areas, but they also receive strong support from Goffstown, which I think is great. Even like our Main Street program, which does our events
Oh yeah,
and things like that.
tell me about that, because I've seen when you go to like an old home day, I see the table with the here's what's going on in the town, and I usually don't go over to that table, embarrassingly.
Oh,
So I want to know more about it. What goes on?
oh, well, no, I'm not an expert on the Main Street program.
Okay.
Um, and Main Street program has done some evolution recently. New people in and new programs that they're coming up with. I can tell you this, they're always looking for volunteers,
Okay.
because they are now an all volunteer operation.
Okay.
Last that I heard, which was just a few months ago, so it's fairly accurate.
All right.
Um,
No asterisk on that one.
no, well,
Remember,
little
smaller asterisk.
yeah, yeah. So we have that. We have we have Crispin's House, which is a unique organization for our community, set up to do nothing but help the town and divert kids who might be. And if Diane ever sees this, please, if I mangle it, I apologize. But helps divert kids who might be headed towards more legal actions. Um, and really provides some good trainings and things like that for our community. We have really good community programs for pretty much anything you could think of here in Goffstown, which is wonderful.
That's really great.
Yeah.
So what roles, now that we're talking about Goffstown locally, have you played in the local government?
Glad I could give you a segue. And not the one with the two wheels on it. So I have been the longest serving position that I've held is trustee of trust funds. I've been the chair of the trustee of trust funds for a number of years now. I can't tell you how many off the top of my head. But more importantly, very few people know what the trustee of trust funds does
Yeah, I
here
have
in
no idea
Goffstown.
what that is.
It's a wonderfully small board. There's only 3 of us and 2 alternates. We've had the same members, mostly the same members for my entire terms, however many I've had, and I apologize. And they're all and they're from all over the place. I mean, we don't talk politics in town positions.
A little bit blurry. Hold on.
It's
Let's
just
see.
me. I'm moving too fast. See, there I went again.
Yeah, it'll be fine.
Anyway, we don't do politics in our town positions. But we have people from all over the political spectrum in a room helping to oversee all of the funds that come in through the town and for specific purposes. So literally, we monitor the trust funds that have been deposited for different purposes. We take in any new funds that are made available, and we run them, create accounts for them, and oversee those accounts as well. It's great for me as a fairly newcomer to town. I've only been here for 12 years. I think I have about 8 more before they'll consider me a resident, and it gave me kind of a window into the values of the town by seeing what all the different funds support.
Okay.
Many of them are scholarship funds. Those are my most active ones, the ones I work with the most,
Okay.
because they do something annually. The other ones I see when they need to access funds in order to be able to fulfill a specific purpose in time. But it also put me in contact with the people who participate in all of those activities. You know, they're on boards and committees that need to access those funds, and so I get to interact with them. And I also can I switch roles for a second?
Sure.
It segues really nice with my role I had on the budget committee,
Mhm.
where we would review all of the budgets for the town and for the school,
Okay.
because it helped me match the names on these funds, which are basically in honor of,
What
match
is that?
in honor of a person.
Okay. Okay.
Trying to think of one off the top of my head.
So these are trusts
Trust funds.
these are trust funds through local government.
No,
These are private funds.
we do the school funds, and for town, we hold all those funds in there. But we also have many that were done as part of bequest from an individual who passed away,
Okay.
and they've willed something to the town for a specific purpose, like a scholarship,
Okay. Yeah.
like care of a cemetery plot, overall care of a piece of our historic
Mm.
history here in Goffstown. So those things need maintenance and all of that. Scholarships need to be dispersed,
Right.
and other funds for things that are more of a day-to-day matter, like funding between the schools. Those have to be, someone has to request those funds, and that's us. We take care of that. Now, I don't know how big your membership is, but part of the thing I like about our job is that people in town aren't really aware that we do this, because everything seems to work pretty seamlessly through all of our committees, through the school, and this kind of runs in the background, but you guys do get to see when students get up and are awarded a scholarship at the end of the year, and they get to go to a college that maybe they would not have been able to afford before, because that money was set aside, and someone said it's important that we do this for next generations. So I think it gave me kind of a crash course in Goffstown history, or at least this side of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. So you also talked about the budget committee. It sounds like I wanted to ask about that because I do not know a lot about what government budgeting looks like in practice, and it sounds like that's a source of income I'd never even thought of before. You know, there's taxation, but then there's also maybe people bequeathing trusts to you.
And those don't go to the school.
Okay.
Those are scholarships for specific students who meet criteria that the person who left the funds thought was important.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see. It could be, someone who's involved in sports, or someone who, based on where they lived or what their parents did,
Yeah.
just trying to pass on a legacy,
Right.
through a small scholarship amount.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a great way to remember them in our community. And our list of all of these funds is published every year in the town annual report.
Right.
So you can see the names anywhere, and if you look at them, you will notice them in your community every day in street signs and statues and names, because their families still live here.
That is that is one of the nice things about I mean my family has they're one of those families where they just know everybody. I go to the grocery store and everybody automatically knows
How long
who a
has your
preview
family
is.
lived here?
God, a while. I mean, my meme's like French Canadian. You'll probably tell that from the fact that I said meme. French Canadian, and I think they came down from Canada a generation or two before her. Big family too, so there's lots of previes scattered around New Hampshire.
Mm. My wife's family is from Arcadia,
Mm.
and they were forced out of Arcadia, like many people were. They landed in Hooksett though,
Okay.
so they and now we live here in Goffstown. So probably there's some relationship between some of the other people here who probably had the same experience. It was from what my wife has told me, it was like a quick, all of you have to leave sort of thing.
Wow.
I don't know the circumstances. I'm not a historical buff, unfortunately.
So you said you've lived here for what about 12 years now?
Yeah, but that was all kid time. You have to remember that was all children time. So that time went by way faster than regular time. Yeah.
That's fair. That's fair.
So budget committee
Yeah.
was one of the roles that I really wanted to play. I have a background of an MBA. I have a master's in policy. I have a master's in community economic development, and my doctorate in community economic development. So it was really important to me. I wanted to see how this worked, and that was a good bridge for me to learn more about the community too. Because one of the things that the budget committee does, and they're doing it fairly soon, I think, is they're doing tours of all of the buildings in order to get to give the budget committee just the ability to see. I think it's mine.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
The ability to see the buildings we're talking about, to talk to the administrators and the teachers and individuals at the schools and the people who work at town hall, to go and see our parks, Roy Park and Barnard Park, and to be able to have more of a grasp about the history, like going to Grassmere. I lived here way too long without realizing we have 3 distinct portions to our town. We have Pinardville, we have the village, and we have Grassmere, which I only knew was a building that you drive by to go out of Goffstown. They also go to the police stations and the fire departments.
Okay, yeah.
So they really get an immersion into what's going on in the town. They get to listen to all of the people who work in it day to day.
And who was this that's going to
The
different
budget
places?
committee.
The budget committee itself
Yeah.
is going to get immersed in the community?
Yeah, that's an integral part of acclimating new budget committee members to the process and to getting updates for any existing committee members, things that might have changed since the last year.
Yeah.
So that they can get some updates in real time and actually see things. Like if they're telling you that something doesn't work anymore, they can tell you that, or they can actually show you while you're there.
Yeah, no, that's good.
If you go into the schools and there's a problem in the bathroom, it's obvious. They can show it to you while you're there, and it makes it easier for you when you're looking at the numbers later to go through and say, oh yeah, I remember seeing that, and I remember what I was thinking about it in that moment. And yeah, I really think that needs to stay in there.
That's absolutely great. Yeah, no, that's integral and essential. I think when a young politician, because I've been looking into what do you do to become a politician, right? What they always tell you to do is first get a grasp of the community itself, because 90% of what you're going to actually be doing won't be as hotly partisan as the news is. It will be community based. It will be, hey, you see that pothole over there? I'll be the guy to fix that. So you have to actually be able to see the real problems, and that sounds like maybe this is something that does that for them. once they're in the job, they're going to be doing that rather than doing it themselves prior to getting the job.
Well, I'll tell you two things. One, I wouldn't, I would say the biggest way that you can learn if you want to be a politician is not to, not so much even to talk to people, but to volunteer in your town.
Mm.
Be a volunteer. There's a difference between talking to people and getting their opinion about it and actually going in and doing the job yourself.
Absolutely.
Whatever job it is that that you have a passion about. The thing that makes you maybe want to get into politics to begin with.
Mm.
So if you are concerned about safety in on the roads, well, there's a committee for that. There's a committee
Right.
for everything.
Oh.
But you could start out as a volunteer and ask, what can I do as a member of the community? Pretty much anything, there's somebody else who's already doing it. And if there isn't, maybe that someone should be you.
Mm. Oh, you know what? That actually might be a good question to ask you. What made you choose the budget committee as a priority place to go to when there are so many different committees on local government?
Well, I chose more than one.
Okay.
Because I do a couple of things. Not only did I do the budget committee, which I'm no longer on the budget committee for this cycle, but was through till last March. And I do trustees of the trust funds, and I'm also on the economic development committee.
Okay.
So I tried to find where my strengths were, and then try them out. I've been trying the trustee of trust funds for a long time now, and I like it.
You're still just getting a feel for it.
I'm still just getting a feel for it. Some of the individuals actually on trustees of trust fund have been there for a really long time and have supported us with other skills that they have from outside of the committee. Everybody brings a different aspect to it, and that's the same for any committee you're on. Your opinion, your upbringing, your background, and your values. I mean, all of that you bring to the table with you. For me in the budget committee, that was, it made me really, really cognizant anytime anybody brought up the idea of discontinuing a service or, something that we don't need that in our school, we don't need that in our town. And if that discontinuation would harm individuals who have less agency than we do, then you'll see, if you ever watch the recorded meetings, you'll see I get a little indignant about it.
Yeah.
And very vocal.
Right.
And other people have their own things that they get really triggered.
Yeah.
Triggered. I'll go with triggered.
No,
I'll own that.
everybody has
Yeah.
something that makes it hits different. It creates a passion.
But mostly, one of the things I tell anybody who's looking to go on the budget committee is this: it's our biggest committee.
Yeah.
And because of that, there is a tempering that happens when you join that committee. You have to, by necessity, listen to each other. There are many, many opportunities in the process of creating, we don't create the budgets, by the way. The school creates the budget, the town creates their budget.
Okay.
We review the budget.
Okay.
And we can make recommendations, and they will make changes.
Okay.
If they think it's appropriate. The idea is we want to get through the process having already agreed on what should be in it.
Okay.
But we don't have that approval. We just recommend.
Yeah, so you.
I think I've said this to you before.
Yeah.
The budget committee has the power to recommend.
Yeah.
That's it.
And that's, to be clear, when you say the town, is that the initiatives that we see on the ballot that we vote on? Because I know it says budget committee recommends down the ballot whenever I vote.
Right. And it says that the biggest ones, the most important ones, are the budget. And that's the hardest one for, I think, for the everyday voter to understand. So they also publish a voter guide,
Mm.
which talks about every single impact that will happen if you vote or don't vote for that. Not last year, maybe I put one out last year. I also put out a quick 1 page, this is how it's going to impact your tax at the end of the season.
Okay.
If you vote for this or for that. And I try to keep it apolitical, but some things in there, as I said, are really important to me,
Yeah.
and I think need to be maintained. So, the budget committee meets for a short period of time before the school period starts, and then they start getting to work, and they'll start getting updates from from the school and from the town on where spending's at. And then eventually they will get a budget from the school, and they will go through every single line item in that budget. They will review it, the school participates, and they do that for the town, for the library, for the school.
Okay.
And then for other smaller, like the Main Street program, they also review that. And they ask questions, and it's a lot of questions, and they make themselves available for the budget committee. They can call them in to talk to them more about it. And in the end, they're going to talk to each other about how they feel about each individual budget. And again, like everything else, they will decide whether to recommend or not recommend. That's their power.
Yeah. So it's a long. It sounds like it's a long process of dialogue, which is probably good.
It is a lot of going back and forth to the table a bit to get additional information. A lot of conversation between the members on the budget committee, who are, I think, fairly, if not fairly evenly split among members most of the time, for affiliations. And you can really tell in the dialogue where people's priorities are, and it is always 98% civil conversation.
Yeah.
We need to do that now they need to do that because it is a large committee, and in order to get anything done, you have to work together.
Absolutely. It's by necessity they end up being civil.
And then we have our deliberative session. I'm going to keep saying we, because I'm still going to participate as an audience member.
Yeah.
If not as the chair anymore or as a budget committee member. And then they have that deliberative session, and the town gets to hear what they're thinking and what their process is and what they're willing to recommend.
So since it came up, I should ask you, how do you feel about having the public voting on these things, on these initiatives put forward, approved by the budget committee?
Recommended by the budget committee.
That is what I meant. Recommended by the budget committee. How do you feel about having the public vote on that? Because I know it's not that way everywhere, and I know some people, even I'm very knowledgeable compared to the average person, I think, on politics, and even I don't know what I'm voting on most of the time.
Now, here again, I think that our town does us a great service because GTV records and we have minutes from every single meeting. Any person in our town can go in, any person anywhere actually, can go on our town website and read those minutes. They can go on YouTube, or they use a different service for the school. I can't remember it off the top of my head. They can go and they can watch the videos of all the meetings.
I might have to ask you to send me the links to that.
I'll send links so you can share.
Yeah.
Actually, that would be a great idea.
Because I have looked in the past sometimes, not specifically for the town information, but for information like this, so that I can have more knowledge about voting. And I found it somewhat difficult to figure out what the channel is. What exact website has it and where.
I can tell you, though I'll send you the actual links for them, but I can tell you that those links are available on the town website.
Okay.
If you go in, can't tell you how to get there off the top of my head.
Yeah.
I have a lot of websites in my head. but they're available and anybody can access them or can read through the minutes if they need that version.
Yeah, so would you say that that transparency is enough, that
Nope,
you
not
trust
at
the
all.
public
They
to?
can also come right to the meeting and watch it.
Okay, yeah.
And they can have, they can listen and hear who is saying what um, and determine whether or not this specific thing that they're talking about in the moment is something that they would want approved.
Huh.
Then they can come to the deliberative session with that in mind.
So, I mean, given that, would you say that having these up to a public vote is generally a good idea?
I think it's the best way to do it
Okay.
because we are a small community, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we may have different um, distinct values,
Mm-hmm.
but on a lot of things we actually agree. We agree we all want good roads.
Right.
I think we've all kind of agreed we don't need another rotary. Um, um,
Yeah, I
and
don't love. I don't love.
we agree that people
rotaries.
who I kind of like them. It's kind of a break, but that's just me. Um, I think we also as a community agree that people need to be able to stay in their homes, raise their kids, and to retire here
Yeah.
without having to move somewhere else because of the cost of living, because of the
Absolutely.
cost of housing. And I still think there's a lot of things we can do in town to help, but I think that some of that help is probably going to be a state issue.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm running for state representative. Because we've had some issues over the last 2 years with more culture politics than actual work being done.
Mm.
Um,
It's gotten increasingly partisan.
it's something other than partisan at the
Oh,
moment.
yeah.
I'm not sure if you want me to talk about that. That might become an entire podcast unto itself.
Maybe go for it. Go for it if you want to.
Well, I'll give you one statement
Sure.
that that I firmly feel that the distraction about books, bathrooms,
Mm.
and gender are just that. They're distraction.
Mm.
They're trying to distract us, and it's being done nationally in every community. They're trying to distract us from the things that are truly important to us, like how we're going to feed our families, where we're going to live, and who we want in office that's going to make a difference for our lives. I think it's just distraction, and we need to get past it to get the work done in Congress and in the Senate, and even on a national level as well.
Sure. Yeah. So, let me think what else to ask you about. Well, let me ask you about your campaign. You're running for state representative.
I am. Some people, if you go back and you look, you might see I've run for state representative before. This year, I think it's even more important for a lot of the reasons we've already been talking about, and to add into that a lot of these culture issues are funneling down into Goffstown. And just for an example, when they make legislation at the State House that says our teachers can't talk to students who might need their help,
Mm.
who come to them with a problem, and who might need to disclose to parents who might not be supportive about an issue that they have. That comes down to us as teachers being fearful of being penalized or even losing their employment over saying something or being taken to court,
Yeah.
which is how some of the legislation was written.
Just for clarity for the audience, you're referring to the parental rights bill, right?
Not just to the parental rights bill, but
Okay.
to specifically, I'm referring to what used to be House Bill 613, I think,
Okay.
that talked about health care for individuals, talked about certain kinds of, I'm trying to think of a way to say this, talked
Okay.
I know I'm going to have to come up with a polite way here, but
I mean, the reason I was clarifying for the layman is because they might not know that we're talking primarily about LGBT people right now, right?
we are. Let me start with that.
Yeah.
And if that's okay, I'll just
Yeah.
run with that.
Yeah, we can just lead with that.
Because I am an LGBT person. I strongly support the rights of individuals to be able to live as they want to live, to be able to love as they want to love, and to be able to receive health care that's appropriate for them from their doctor. We should all have the freedom for appropriate health care, and the right to be able to discuss that with our physician without fear of our physician being fined as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm talking about LGBTQ issues.
Absolutely. And the privacy concern with the parental rights rhetoric, my understanding is that on the right, the idea is that, or maybe I'm oversimplifying by saying on the right, but the idea is that.
I would actually encourage people to try to use, if you can, specifics.
Okay.
So, if, for example, one of our state legislators, Sheila Seidel, has sponsored or co-sponsored a number of pieces of anti-LGBTQ legislation in the House. So
you're right. We can. There's no reason not to say Sheila Seidel sponsored this legislation.
And I can also say that all 5 of our Republican state representatives voted for that legislation.
Yeah.
So I would like to stress the idea of calling out the person and not the party, because I have talked with Republicans in Goffstown who don't feel the same way, who actually embrace the idea that individuals should have the freedom to live whatever life suits them. So I don't want to call out an entire party for what I see as just a small, almost fringe group.
Huh. And the divide on the issue. My understanding is that one interpretation of the issue is parents should have complete control of their child, including when they're at school, which in their eyes would mean if their child is talking about LGBT issues with the teacher, it must be reported to the parents. Whereas the other view would be that's obviously a violation of the child's rights, of the child's privacy, and it could out them to potentially homophobic parents.
I think you've kind of nailed that, but I would also I would go one level above that by trying to make it state law.
Right.
They are actually they're restricting a particular class of individuals from being able to express themselves in a way that would be natural for other individuals, by requiring reported mandating of their behavior, and actually would put a stress on our schools as well, who would have to document all of that.
It would be an obligation on the teachers to have to constantly report what they've been talking to their students about in that way.
And it actually brought up concerns of aggravating already a teacher shortage. Because teachers, obviously, they're parents, they're people. They don't want to be put in a position where they could be taken to court or lose their job over it. But more importantly, I know here in Goffstown, our teachers don't want to do anything that would put students in harm's way.
Well, you could even say it's kind of a surveillance issue in that sense, right? I think one framework for thinking about this that I've seen is the opposite of surveillance is trust, and the same sort of thing here. If there's a deep distrust happening, then what you end up with is, I've heard it called securitarianism, the idea of sort of excessive preemptive defense against a non-existent threat, right? I think this is that sort of a thing.
Could I even say it's a solution without a problem?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we've had no problems because of this in Goffstown, and yet all of our Republican representatives are bringing the rhetoric and the idea into our local politics.
Yeah, And that's actually, I think that's another thing I want to try and emphasize on this podcast, especially with every guest I talk to, is I think that our news, partly because we've lost so many local news stations, and partly because it's just more attention grabbing, has moved everything to the national level, and then even within that to the president, and thus we don't talk about the local politics, we don't talk about state politics, and when we do, we're talking about people who only know about the national level, right? People like Sheila Seidel, they're thinking from the national politics, and they're bringing forward legislation on that level.
Right. They've taken the entire party platform
Yeah.
and they are imposing it or attempting to impose it onto our state government. Um, and to the detriment, and one of the most obvious applications of it is abortion.
Yeah.
I don't want to go into specifics about it, except that every individual deserves the right to oversee their own health care with their doctor. That should happen behind the curtain at the doctor's office, or it's going to happen at the voting booth,
Right.
and they should be aware of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we're coming up on a little bit over an hour
Oh,
right
don't I
now.
could talk to you forever.
Is there anything else you would like to say before maybe we finish up?
If you're in Goffstown, and I don't know, you could be across the world, but if you're in Goffstown, please make sure to vote in the upcoming election. Make sure to vote in the primary, and make sure that you take an opportunity to meet the candidates. Make sure you look at their social media, and make sure that you have a good idea. Talk to your friends about what they know about them too, because you need to have an informed voice at the voting polls. So, and please, if you have any opportunity to be a volunteer in Goffstown, to work for any of the wonderful programs that's working every day for you behind the scene, whether it's being in your child's school or working in the food pantry, in the clothing center, or just in a volunteer role for any of the other programs that we have going on, take it. It helped me learn so much about my community, make some fantastic friends, and even get involved in local and state politics.
Absolutely. That was great, and thank you for coming on.
Oh, you're welcome.